Liam Pickering spent the 1990s plying his trade as an AFL player, and he was no mug either. Yet his influence in the football industry has been far more profound in the years since. He is a player agent with a huge stable and a profile to match, and 3 players earning $1 million plus a year. Welcome, Pickers.
Good to be here, Mike.
Now, we'll get back to that. Let's talk footy first.
Yep.
Your father, Michael, played at North Melbourne?
He did, yeah.
6 or 8 games in a couple of years?
Six games, yeah.
You followed him to North. It didn't go well, did it?
Well, I enjoyed my time at North. I loved it. Played under 2 coaches. Played under John Kennedy Senior, who was just brilliant. And then Wayne Schimmelbusch. And then, only 22 games. So, no, from a football perspective, it didn't, no.
Yeah. And then you were involved in one of the great trades in football history. Pickering, Lee Tudor, Darren Steele all leave North Melbourne for Geelong in return for draft selection at number 123.
Or, as I like to call it, a packet of chips. They gave us away in the end, yeah.
Was that slightly deflating?
Not really, because I sort of knew I wasn't going to be on North's list next year, and I was sort of chasing the cricket angle at that stage. So when Geelong offered the opportunity to go down there, I didn't care how I got there, so I was happy to get traded. So looking back now, it's quite funny they got 3 players basically for that pick. But no, it ended up being great for me to actually get there.
At that point of your life, was the priority football or cricket?
At that time, at the end of '92, it was cricket. I was in the state squad and I was sort of tracking hopefully towards playing state cricket. So I just thought after 22 games in 5 years, I wasn't good enough. And so I was very happy to move on and play footy until I got a phone call from Steve Wells and things changed.
Were you better at cricket or footy, do you think? In your own mind, we all know where our proficiency is.
I think if I had been able to give cricket the same amount of time with training and that, I might have been better at cricket than footy.
Tell us how close you got to playing for Victoria.
Well, I think in that year when I was in the state squad, I top scored in the trial games. So John Grant, the chairman of selectors at the time, told me that I'd play in the first Shield game. It looked like I'd be playing the first Shield game, and lo and behold, Dean Jones got dropped from the Australian team, which was a surprise at the time. No one expected Dino to get dropped, so that spot went, and so did my chance of playing, I guess, at that time.
More than 100 games for the Cats and 2 grand finals. I mean, they were painful experiences as the way they turned out, but that's a pretty good comeback for a bloke who couldn't get a game at one club.
Yeah, look, I was lucky to get the opportunity to play at Geelong. And I only really, in the end, went there because, as I said, I was focusing on cricket at that time because of Malcolm Blight, and he was my hero growing up. So when Blighty said, come down, I think you can get a game for Geelong, I actually said, well, I'm happy to come and meet with you. And I remember sitting in his office and he's got his feet on the desk. Geelong had played in the 92 grand final. I couldn't get a game for North. It finished, I don't know, 10th or wherever it was. And I said, look, Blighty, I'm going to be really upfront. How can I get a game at Geelong? I can't get a game for North Melbourne, finishing 10th. And you've just played in the grand final. You've got Couch, Hocking, Bairstow, and these guys in the midfield. He's leant back on his chair, as Blighty does, and he had his feet on the desk, and he said, well, that's the beauty of it. You don't have to worry about it. I'm the coach. I'll tell him you get a game in the midfield. So once he told me that, I just thought, well, I'm going to give this a go.
Every bloke who sat in that chair that's had any experience with Blighty has got a favourite story about him.
Oh, look, to be honest, I mean, I've heard all the stories that Billy and all the other boys have said. There's a million of them, but what I will say is he was probably the biggest influence on my football career from a knowledge of the game, and I learnt more under him in 2 years than I had in the previous 23 years of my life.
The 2 grand finals, one against West Coast, one against Carlton. Quiet game against West Coast for you, like most of your mates in blue and white. Pretty good game against Carlton, though. You had the most possessions for the Cats that day.
That doesn't really mean much, does it?
No, it doesn't mean much when your team's been smashed.
Well, we've gotten smashed, yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, they were great experiences to play in the grand finals, and that was my second and third years at Geelong. But 94, we probably were lucky to get to the grand final. We won 2 games after the siren. We beat Carlton with 4 of our best players not playing in one of the finals. And then Gary obviously kicked that goal against North Melbourne in the prelim, which was the best game of footy I've ever played in as far as a standard. We got the grand final day and West Coast were far too good for us, to be honest. 95, we'd had a very good season, but we just turned up and played really poorly on that day. We played them once during the season at Princess Park and they beat us by a goal. And we turned up grand final day. Look, I think they were a better team than us, but they weren't a 10-goal better team. We just had a very poor day.
Now, your time at Geelong, a best and fairest, 100 games, 2 grand finals, third in the best and fairest. You've got to be happy with that in retrospect.
Look, I think I got as much as I could out of my career when I was available. I had a few injuries towards the end, but yeah, I enjoyed the finals part of it. The individual awards, like the BNF in 97, obviously you look back now and you're very proud of it. 95 was probably my most consistent year, which is when I came third. But we'd played 25 games and I hadn't missed a game. So that sort of was, it was good to actually get through a year without injuries because I'd had quad and hamstring injuries in 94 and 96. And then 97 I was pretty injury-free as well, which is when I won it.
Two Gary Abletts appear prominently in your history. Gary Ablett Sr. you played with. You played with him in a 3-year period in which he kicked 375 goals. I mean, how blessed were you blokes to have a front row seat to that?
Oh, it was brilliant. It was a theory in the midfield. It was that if you're in trouble, just kick it to Gaz. And that was a genuine theory because you thought if you put it in his area, something would invariably happen. And he was the best player I've ever seen as far as what he could do. I've never seen anything like him. And so I've got no doubt if he moved to full forward 5 years earlier, he would have broken every record in the game. Look, he only moved to full forward when he was in his 30s and kicked 100 after 100 after 100. He was just a phenomenal player.
Is there one standout performance that you can recall?
Look, the best game I've seen an individual play was against Essendon in 1993 and kicked 14 goals, 7 and we lost, which was unbelievable if you think about it. This guy was putting on a clinic. 14 goals, 7, and you just kicked it anywhere near him and he saw off, he would have seen off 3 or 4 players. That day he was out marking 2 and 3 at a time. He was just freakish what he could do. And also to go with that, which I think gets lost a bit, is how aggressive he was. And we often laugh about it, you're a little bit dirty there, guys. No, I wasn't.
Well, he was probably played, I guess, at about 90 kilos and he could run at even time.
Yeah.
So he was a wrecking ball, wasn't he?
He was. I don't think I've ever seen a more dangerous footballer on a football field and he knew how to protect himself. So back then you could fly early for marks and take out the bloke with you and he'd still take the marks, but he'd cause some carnage along the way.
You played with senior and you managed junior. Have you got a view about who has had the better career?
Look, I think they're the best 2 footballers I've seen.
Really?
I think that Cornell are the best 2
the
footballers.
Bias aside, this is an objective judgment.
Well, as you said, I saw Gary up close and personal. I've never seen anyone do anything like that. And I think that Gary Jr. is the most complete footballer I've ever seen.
Were you in favour of Gary Jr. going to the Gold Coast?
Well, I was supportive of what Gary's decision was going to be.
But he would have turned to you, he would have wanted some advice from you.
Well, he did. And what I do with all the guys when they're talking about a move is I'll normally put together a couple of pages on each, the pros and cons. And in the end, I can't make the decision for them. And I say that to the players, is that these are the things you need to think about. If you stay at Geelong, legend of the club, set yourself up for life, post-career, you'll always be loved, etc., going up to a new franchise. So I gave him my views on what I thought were the pros and cons in both. And in the end, I said, Gaz, you'll have to make the call on this, which in the end he did.
But did he say to you at any point, Pickers, what would you do?
We discuss things all the time. But no, I never influence a player to do anything because in the end it's a very personal decision. So as a manager, I won't say you should do that because it's not me playing, it's Gary. You can't make the decision for them. They've got to make the call. So all you can do is offer advice and offer support, and that's basically what I did with Gary.
Was Gary tired? Was he stale at Geelong?
Oh, no, I don't think he was stale, no. He was on the top of his game.
He was he?
Yeah.
So, and mentally, he liked being around the place?
Oh, I loved it, yeah. Loved Geelong, loved Torquay. He still loves the place. Yeah. But, I mean, I look at it and think, probably the reason we got into that situation, well, obviously there was a new franchise coming in, but also, I guess, the money that was going to be offered was, and the excitement around the new franchise. But you understand, Gary was the best player in the AFL, clearly, 7, 8, 9, 10. And he had a contract that he signed with his previous manager that locked him in for that whole 5-year period. So he was the best player in the game and wasn't even the highest paid player at Geelong. So over that 3 or 4 year period leading into when he did leave, I had numerous discussions with Brian Cook, numerous discussions with Neil Bale about redoing his contract. But the problem is the Cats were going so well, they would have to lose 1 or 2 players to do it. So if they had rejigged his contract and we had to put him on the level he would have been, I don't think he would have ever been in the position to go to the Gold Coast.
Pickers, there's been some discussion about whether it's feasible that Gary could end up back at Geelong and finish his career. Do you give that any credence?
Not at the moment, Mike, because he's locked in for 2 more years. It's a pretty hefty salary without telling you what it is. He's the captain of the club. My view would be that it would take something extraordinary, and I don't see it happening.
Was his first deal at the Gold Coast $6 million for 5 years?
You know I'm not going to talk about what the players are earning, Mike. I can't. And I certainly won't be confirming or denying any numbers that he ever put to me because there's a confidentiality that goes with managing a player and I certainly won't be breaking any of them.
Yeah?
You can try. You won't get an answer from me.
The Buddy Franklin deal. people keep telling me and say that it's even a matter of record that the discussions about Franklin going to Sydney started more than 12 months before he went there. Started after the 2012 grand final. True?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Interesting time for you, wasn't it? You're the manager of Buddy Franklin, who's at Hawthorn.
Yeah.
And you're the manager of the Hawthorn coach, Alistair Clarkson. It's caused some fallout, hasn't it?
No, not fallout as such.
No.
I mean, Alistair's no, it's not, because we're still friends. And John Longmire, myself and Alistair Clarkson will be friends forever, because we've been mates since we were 17, 18 years of age. So that's not the point with that. There's no fallout personally. As a player and as a manager of the coach that's got the player, Alistair basically said to me, you need to make a decision. You either manage players or coaches. I said, well, it's a pretty easy decision to make. I've got 50 players and you and Horse, basically, 2 coaches.
50 coaches, yeah.
So, I mean, from my perspective, it was an easy decision. The talk with Buddy was an interesting one because we'd been negotiating throughout the course of that year, Mark Evans and myself, potentially extending Bud.
Mark Evans was at Hawthorn
at the time, yeah. He's now at the AFL. And then we put that on hold because Buddy had had a car accident and he was getting a lot of external pressure, people wanting to, at his house, they knew where he lived. He was getting a lot of TV, sort of camera crews and whatnot at his house. So that meant that he was a little bit gun-shy about the whole, let's just wait. He wasn't feeling very comfortable. So once the season finished, he said, look, and he was seeing Jacinta, his partner, that I'd like to consider potentially looking to move to Sydney and getting out of Melbourne.
So you did a great job there. I mean, everyone thought he was going to go to GWS. You and the Swans have done the deal behind closed doors. How did you feel what did Clarko say to you when he became aware that you were taking his best player to an opposition club?
Oh, I think he was expecting him leaving. I don't think there was any issues because they'd put talks on hold with us. They'd given us a date, and the date was, I can't think for memory, it might have been, they needed an answer on what their offer was by July 1st. I'd been dealing with Graham Ryder. Alistair stayed out of it all year. Didn't say anything. We didn't discuss it at all, to be honest. And then the offer from the Swans came through in the middle of the final series, and I think they were playing each other around that time. So I wasn't
the year being 2013,
whenever he left. Yeah. So it was in the middle of that final series. They ended up winning the flag, and then I told Alistair, obviously, after the grand final.
What did he say to you, Pickers?
Well, he was a little bit upset that it was Sydney and not GWS because I think they'd braced themselves for GWS. They hadn't braced themselves for the Swans, and none of us had. Well, and the reason being, Mike, and I look back now, people say, well, how did you get away with it? As in, when you say get away with it, how did no one know? And my view was that it was from the very get-go when we first met, and it was in around January of that year, and it was around the test match up there, and I was up there staying with John, or seeing John.
John Longmire,
yeah. And we go to the test every year. And Buddy was up there seeing his girl, and that was when we first met at Andrew Island's place. But by then, it was still a mile off, and I genuinely thought all year that Buddy will change his mind. And I said it to the Swans, I said, I wouldn't be planning with him because things could change. Buddy could change his mind. And I said the exact same thing to both Hawthorn and the Giants when I thought it looks like it's going to happen with Sydney, is plan without him. So you look back now and you think, everyone says, well, Sydney, ambushed us or whatever. But we knew, and I knew definitely, that if the AFL had got wind, in my view, of him potentially going to Sydney, that deal would not have got done. Because the Giants, they wanted him at the Giants because that was their new baby. And Buddy, in the end, decided he wanted to play for the Sydney Swans.
You're saying, let me make sure I've understood this.
Don't give me a jacko.
No,
yeah, okay.
I'll sit back.
Sit back.
You're saying that had the AFL known that his preference was Sydney and not GWS, they would have aborted that deal?
Oh, I've got no doubt that would happen.
How would they have done that?
Well, Mike, the deal was purely a contract deal in the end. There was an investigation to tick it off. It was all in the salary cap. They were doing nothing wrong. He was a restricted free agent. In fact, Hawthorn could have matched the deal, and that gets left by everybody. No one even mentions the fact that the Hawks had the chance to match the Sydney offer. They chose not to. So we then went through an investigation, and we all got interviewed about who spoke to who when and all that stuff. It's a straightforward trade. It was a free agency move. So I've got absolutely no doubt that GWS, first thing they would have done is gone to the AFL. And every club would have been bleeding about it because they just signed
But how could they block the deal if it's done within the rules?
Well, I don't know if they would have blocked the deal, but what I'm saying is there certainly would have been a massive issue over it.
Did Buddy need to get out of Melbourne?
He felt he did.
What, the pop star culture?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, when we were in the year leading in, he'd had that car accident and he'd sped in his street. So everyone knew where he lived because all the press were there, and he was and he ended up moving into an apartment, in South Yarra, and leaving his house empty because he was sick of people being at his front door. So he felt that it was time for a change, and I think with his partner being up there too, it sort of made sense.
And it's worked, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I think it's worked really well. I mean, his first year was great. He won the Coleman. Last year he had some issues at the end of the year, and obviously this year he's having a great season.
Those issues, depression, did you know it was coming? Did you know that condition existed, and how serious was it?
Oh, look, Mike, I don't want to go into any of my players' personal situations. To be honest, I don't. I mean, I'm across a lot of things that Buddy, over the years, 8 or 10 years I managed him, there were a number of things that I was across, but I don't think this is the right forum to talk about someone else.
Okay, why don't you have him anymore, Pickers? Why is he not one of your clients any longer?
When he moved to Sydney, his partner Jacinta Campbell has obviously got her own manager, and he ended up deciding that it was easier to be managed out of Sydney. Well, obviously we'd already done the deal, and he'd been honouring that.
So you used to get the commissions off that deal?
Yeah, so he's been honouring that deal. But, I think he just felt he needed someone on the ground in Sydney, which, I mean, admittedly, I was a little bit hurt at the time, given what we'd gone through to actually make it happen for him. Because if you ask me, my view was, and I've said it to the Swans as well, my view was he should have stayed at Hawthorn, if you're looking purely at a football. At the time, that's what I thought. I'm rapt for him that he's up there and he's doing really well.
Commissions, you mentioned them. It hurt you, I guess, spiritually, but it hurt you in the pocket too, didn't it? I mean, do you get 4% of a player's contract?
Yeah, that's the standard.
Yeah, and you get 20% of their marketing?
Yeah, of endorsements, yeah. I mean, that's a standard, not just for my company, Precision, but it's for all the managers.
It must mean some money, doesn't it, when a bloke's getting $1 million a year?
Yeah, well, as I said, he's still honouring his commissions anyway. So, I mean, it's not like he hasn't been making his payments, because he has.
Liam, when we come back, the evolution of the Boyd deal. There's a kid called Tom Boyd, who's another $1 million plus a year man. I'm fascinated by how this deal came about. He's a GWS player who's had 1 year there, and he ends up at Footscray, at the Bulldogs, a year later.
You're showing your age now, Footscray.
I know, Footscray. At the Western Oval.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one, Mike, with Tom, because he was obviously, they'd offered him a contract. Steve Silvani was the list manager at the time of the Giants, and midway through that year, that second year, midway through his first year, I was up on the Gold Coast at the Under-16 Carnival, and I met with Jason McCartney. He said, look, we've got some interest in Tom Boyd. Do you think the Giants would consider trading him at the end of the year? I said, well, not a hope in hell they'll trade him. First year in as a number 1 draft pick. So we parked it, but we talked some potentially what they would look at doing at the end of his second year if he was still not re-signed with the Giants. So it was a general conversation that a player manager would have with a list manager. And we left it at that, basically, until they got to the period throughout the trade period where Ryan Griffin walked out on the Dogs. And then it was Peter Gordon on the phone and Simon Garlick at the time and Jason McCartney going, is it worth revisiting? And I said, absolutely it is. So that's when we had a number of meetings with, certainly at Peter's house actually, and with Tom and his dad, and they sold the picture of where it was at. And at that stage, Brendan McCartney was still the coach. And so where it went from there was, all right, well, let's see if we can get this trade done. And originally the Giants said that there was no way they'd trade him. So, we basically called him out on it and said, all right, well, he's going to go next year. And that's exactly what would have happened. So that wasn't just he would have left at the end of the next year. We were going to commit to the Western Bulldogs for the following year. Not in writing as such, but Tom would have played his year out and he would have gone there. Recently,
an ex-teammate of yours by the name of Cam Mooney suggested that your man take a haircut, meaning a pay cut.
Yeah, I saw that, yep.
What'd you make of that? Did you ring Mearns?
No, I didn't ring Mearns. Mearns is a mate of mine. Look, my view is he's in the media now. He's entitled to say whatever he wants to say. I don't agree with his comment. Luke Darcy said it as well. I mean, that's their prerogative. That's their entitlement, if you like. They can say what they want. They're in the media. But my view is it was a slow news day. There was no real point in it.
Yeah. You know how impatient we are in football these days?
I do.
There's a lot of pressure on your boy. Not only does he get $1 million a year, Tommy Boyd, but his progress has been modest.
Yeah, but he's been dealing with injuries as well since he's got to the Dogs. Like, he's had a shoulder problem. So I've got absolutely no doubt that he's going to be a star. No doubt whatsoever in my mind. He's a 20-year-old big forward. I mean, he's going to be a very good player. He'll be well and truly worth the investment.
One of your clients is a bloke by the name of Dane Swan, and he's been a brilliant player for Collingwood, no question of that. What's his future?
Well, it'll depend over the next few weeks exactly what happens, because he's obviously got another surgeon's appointment, and I'd love to see him play on, but he's got a pretty significant foot injury, so it's going to be a touch-and-go job, I think.
Right now, do you expect we'll see Dane Swan playing for the Pies again?
50,
right now, gut feel.
50-50 for mine. I still couldn't call it either way. I think he'd love to. It's just I've seen the significance of his injury, and I've seen all the scans, and I know what the reports have been, so it's going to be hard.
Layman's terms, what's he done?
He's wrecked his Linz Frank in his foot,
Okay.
which required screws and pins, and if you have a look at the X-ray of it's horrendous. You'd think you'd never get back. So the leg that broke was fine, but the foot is going to be the biggest problem.
Pretty brutal game, this, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Has it changed since you... I thought it was more physical, more overtly physical when you played, but the toll on these modern blokes is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think people that... mate, I love playing in the 90s. I think it was a great era to play footy in, and there was a bit of dirty stuff, but there was some real hard, tough players that went hard at the footy, and the skills level were pretty good. So 90s I liked. The modern players now hit with such ferocity, and look, the game protects them a lot more, but there's still some serious injuries, and there's also some freak injuries. I mean, you look at poor Mitch Wallace. I mean, that could have happened in any era.
Let's get to the messy side of your professional life, Liam. You leave IMG, the internationally acclaimed IMG, and you join a company called Strategic Management. And that ends badly, doesn't it? And it's still not finished yet.
No, we've been through the courts with it. We left over 2 years ago, so I moved on from that 2.5 years ago, whenever it was. It just wasn't. I got into business with a bloke that just didn't have the same values
Bloke's
as me.
name?
Jason Sarasis.
Yep.
And in the end, I had to make the decision. James Pitcher, who works for me, and I had to make the decision that we had to remove the players from that. And it wasn't by choice. I didn't go to Strategic to leave, but we had to go.
The Supreme Court judge who heard the case, who heard the action involving you and Sarasis, said it was no winners in this.
That's right. And I mean, it hasn't been reported that way, of course, but it's
What do you mean by that?
Oh, there's only one side of the argument being reported.
Is this a shot at Mark Robinson?
Well, Mark Robinson's friends with Jason Sarasis, so that's just never been put on the table. So without going into all that, because as I said, I moved on 2 years ago, but the reporting of the case has been so one-sided. If they actually reported the court findings, it is a bit of a nil-all draw, really, and that's where it sits.
The impression we get from the outside and what we read is that you were heavily into negotiations to start your own company while you're still working for Strategic. Is that fair?
In what way to start my own company?
Well, as soon as you left, you had blokes with you.
Oh, well, that happens. That was always going to happen. I mean,
was it?
Yeah. What happens is that the players are loyal to the agents, and James Pitcher and I were the agents, so they were always going to come with us. They're not loyal to a company as such. I mean, they're not loyal to IMG. They're not loyal to ESP or whoever it may be. They're loyal to their agents. So the company is the overriding thing, but the reality is that in the end, if you ask the players who their manager is, they'll say myself or James or if it's Paul Connors or whoever it is. Yeah, they just say who the person is. So
why didn't you were talking about player loyalty? Why didn't the Collingwood captain Scott Pendlebury go with you?
Well, Scott he's heavily invested.
But he was your client, though, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. I signed him at 17. I drove to Sale to sign him. So he was a little bit disappointed. I mean, Scott told me when we left that he was managing himself, and that's exactly what I took on face value.
You were disappointed?
No, I was disappointed, but I mean, Scott's a good bloke, and his family are good people. So,
are you disappointed because of the financial connotation, or because it's almost someone saying, "Look, I'm not your mate anymore"?
Yeah, it's not the finances. I mean, because for every Scott Pendlebury, we've got a Jacob Wiedering, we've got a Tom Broyd, we've got a James Ace, we've got a Josh Dunkley. So, if they don't want to be with us, that's fine. I mean, in the end, we think we do a very good job. So, you either want to be with us or you don't. Our players know they get 100% support whenever anything goes wrong, as well as when it's going good.
How many players do you have?
45.
45.
Yeah, and that includes some coaches, and so around about 45 all up. So players 35. We've got some, obviously John Lombard, got a lot of assistant coaches that were clients when they played, so we've continued to look after their stuff.
Do you have a natural advantage given that you've been in the arena, given that you've had 10 or 11 years as an AFL player?
Oh, I think it certainly helps. I mean, to have actually been through everything the kids go through, and that's things that, even in my career, that, drafted from the country, moving into a clubhouse, playing AFL footy, getting delisted, basically traded, having some success, injuries you deal with. So I think being an ex-player, that really helps. And there's a few ex-players that are in the player management industry. And I think they've got a definite advantage as far as if the kids look at it like that, to be able to get advice of what it's actually like.
You're not a big rep in the media, though, are you?
No, I like the media.
Do you?
I absolutely like the media.
You keep that well hidden.
What do you say, though? I'm in the media.
Yeah,
When I say
you've got a long-running, I don't know, feud's the word, but you're not happy with Mark Robinson. You've had issues with Caroline Wilson.
Yeah, but Mark Robinson is that's not deserved, but that's just what it is. I'm very happy for Mark Robinson to write and say whatever he wants, but just put some context around it. That's all I've ever said.
Do you and he talk?
No.
No. Is that your fault or his?
Well, I'm not the one that's writing stuff, and basically attacking me. I don't write anything and attack him personally, so I just think it was a very deliberate, and not just by the Herald Sun, but Caroline Wilson. Carol and I have got quite an interesting relationship. Socially we get along very well, but we have a lot of blues about things that Caro might write. So I'm very protective of Dane Swan, and I think Caro's had it in for him for a long time, and I haven't liked the way that she's personally attacked Dane over things that he's had nothing to do with.
Now, I know you're close mates with Hutchie. We touched on that. I have a hazy memory of a dispute involving Craig Hutchison and you when you were looking after Justin Kositsky. Am I right?
Yeah, there was. That was back when that rape case was going on, and Hutchie went with an update. He rang me and said that this is what he'd heard, that Cosy was involved, and I hadn't been able to get on to Cosy. I said, well, you can't go with that. I haven't even spoken to him. Let me try him. And he went with it anyway.
On television?
On television, yeah. In the end, we sued him and Channel 7.
You sued?
Absolutely.
And it didn't ruin the friendship?
No. I just remember standing there. I was actually at a pub with one of my mates, Barry Stoneham, and a couple of other blokes I played footy with. And Hutchie walked in and he says, Pickers, how you going? And I said, Hutchie? He goes, I saw you suing me. I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, you want a beer? And I said, yeah, right. And that was pretty much it. And that's how we got over it. We took him as hard as we could, and he got it.
And for money?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Cosy got a nice payout out of it.
How much?
I can't remember. I think it was 30,000 or something at the time.
Okay.
But the point was, from my end, is that, and it's very unlike Hutchie, and I reckon it's the biggest mistake he would admit that he's ever made in media, was that it was very unfair on Justin because he had nothing to do with it, and it really upset his family.
And the nature of the allegation.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
You got. Cossy's parents are up in the country and they see an update and the family all see it. It's like he's involved in something that he had nothing to do with. So, as I said, they obviously put the retraction out, but the damage can already be done. So that's why I like journalists to be able to double-check stories before you run with them.
We do, Liam, we do.
The good ones do.
You're my Jerry Maguire, mate. I used to watch you play, and I don't know if I was surprised that you went into this field, but you certainly have made a big impression looking after young players and getting lots of money for them and looking after their interests. Well done. I think we forget too easily about what blokes like you have done in their playing careers, and I'm sure it's helped you on the way through.
It has.
Good to see you, Pickers.
Thanks, Mike.
This has been a Fox Footy production, part of the Fox Sports Network.